everybody out there in Claremont and watching on ClaremontTelevision.com. I'm Ned Halaby, and this is the most recent episode of Seen on Screen with Ned Halaby. We have an awesome show for you today, probably the biggest deal of a show that I can imagine in recent memory, because we have the director of Intercollegiate Media Studies herself, Tracy Biga Maclean, sitting in with me today, talking about her newest book, or her first book actually, called Television at the Movies: Cinematic and Critical Responses to American Broadcasting. Welcome to the show, Tracy.
Thanks, Ned. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to have you here on the show because I want you to be able to tell the student body directly what this book is about.
Well, I wrote the book with a friend of mine who I met when I was in graduate school, which was the USC School of Cinema Television at the time, which is now, the name's been changed to the School of Cinematic Arts. And we were in the Division of Critical Studies, so we looked at theory and history and that type of thing. And we were very good friends, and you know, life takes you different directions, and so we decided to write this book together. And then we usually write other things together as well. So we did an interactive piece for the electronic book review, which was, you know, sort of a non-linear piece. And we've, you know, written some other things together, and we decided to do this book. So that was quite a while ago. It took us a long time to write it. But now it's coming out. It's been accepted for publication by Continuum Books, and it will come out at the beginning of May this year.
That's awesome. How long did it take you to write the book in total?
That's a bad question, because it took years and years, but partly that was because we were writing it together, and we would do it on weekends, or we would do it, you know, we'd get together sometimes, but it wasn't like we could work on it constantly. And at the beginning, we would write different sections separately, and then we would we would exchange them, read them together, and edit them together. And then after a while, towards the end, we really were starting to write like in the same room together, and that was fun and exciting.
So what does cinematic and critical responses to American broadcasting mean?
The thing we were interested in was the fact that everybody says that they don't like television. And a lot of people tell me that they don't watch television at all. And then when I actually talk to them about certain things, they seem to know a lot about different programs. And so one of the things that we both noticed was that there's this very negative attitudes towards television that we see both in television theory and criticism, the kind of things that we were reading in graduate school, and also movies about television. And probably the most famous one of those is Network, which we talk about, where Faye Dunaway is, you know, described as universal madness or television, you know. Or at one point they call her Bugs Bunny because she's so, you know, supposed to be so lowbrow and terrible. But there's other movies like Being There, The King of Comedy, which is Martin Scorsese's movie, A Face in the Crowd. So those are some of the Cable Guy. We talk about those in a major way, but we also make references to things like Murder by Television, or Poltergeist, or The Ring, where, you know, the television will literally kill you, or, you know, danger will come out of the television set. Or Shocker's another example, where, you know, the serial killer just travels around in the electronic system. And it's kind of interesting, why is this most dominant media in our culture talked about in such a terrible way? And one of the things that we noticed was that every time you have a new form, it's sort of denigrated. You know, so when Dante writes the Divine Comedy in Italian rather than Latin, it's like, oh, you know, that's the end of the world and the end of culture. Or when the novel was originally sort of a debased form, you know, women were going to read these sort of scandalous things in their bedrooms by themselves and get all these notions. Or film, you know, in the early part of the century was sort of, you know, what poor immigrants, that was their entertainment, their cheap kind of Nickelodeon, you know, pleasure, and that was sort of seen as a certain debased form. So we're sort of looking at that, you know, how bad really is television, and why is it so bad?
Sort of, it'll make your eyes bleed or make your eyes turn into squares. I remember my mom gave me a book that said it was called The Boy with the Square Eyes. It was a boy who watched TV so much, and his eyes turned to squares.
Or, you know, when I was little, they said, don't sit close to the television set because the radiation is going to ruin your eyes. And like nobody says that anymore, but that was like one of those.
Or Beavis and Butthead kills your brain cells. That was a myth from my childhood, I think.
Yeah, but I mean, there are some studies about what screen time does to small children, and the American Academy of Pediatricians says that children under 2 should watch no television, and after that it should be supervised. But the actual statistics on, the actual studies are really ambiguous, as are the ones on media violence.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's more like it has a certain kind of cultural impact as this bad thing.
Do you think that this can sort of translate to how people are starting to feel about the internet today? Because there are films that are coming out. The first one that pops to mind is a film that came out recently called Untraceable, where a serial killer uses the internet to help kill his victims. And do you think that some of this criticism about the television can now be, used to criticize the internet?
Well, I think that there is some of that, and I think when you look at the shows like To Catch a Predator, for instance, where there's this idea that children are going to be preyed upon. And usually these kinds of things, especially when they're vague, they just get centered on let's protect the children. Okay. But I think that the internet so much promises the idea of people participating in media, that kind of dream, which I think it goes back much more to early radio than it does to television. And I think there's still a period of optimism right now, and I don't really know how long that's going to last. I think if we give away, if there's no longer net neutrality, which is a very important issue right now, I think it will just turn into another kind of, commercial soup. And I don't know how valuable, it won't be as valuable as it is now, where really everyone can speak, like, for instance, this television program that we're participating in now that we can put on the internet, and we don't actually need to have, like, a really expensive broadcasting station.
So you're saying the interactivity of the internet and sort of the promise of gaining a certain amount of information, the democracy of the internet is what makes it sort of different than television in the argument.
I think that the barriers for entering the internet are much lower than they would be for entering broadcast television or that type of thing. So for instance, this is a modest production, but we're going to go on the internet and you can access it in the same way that you would access Amazon, right? That's actually pretty exciting. But if we were actually going to try and broadcast this, we would run into, a lot of hurdles. That
that's
would be
something that we all know about here at Seen on Screen.
Yeah, financial and logistical and like every other kind of thing. So I think I think that's really still exciting. But I think as a lot of commentators have pointed out, we're in an academic institution where we have really good internet connections, and a lot of people still do not have that. So there is sort of a digital divide, which people are talking about, which still takes place. I think what will end up happening, though, is there might be certain kinds of leapfrogging technologies where people who've never had, for instance, good cable will never go through a cable stage, and they will go directly to getting content on the internet, which I think is increasingly happening.
Why did you choose this as the subject for your first book?
Well, partly it was because I was interested in television. I'd been to film school, and I had a really great sort of classical film theory education. It was really, the only way I can describe it is really classic. But I had gone to film school because I was interested in writing about things that were current. I didn't understand why you would go to graduate school and study, Grecian urns, because I thought, no offense to those people, but a lot of that's already been said. And so I started to move gradually into writing and thinking more about television. And I had done a fellowship where I was studying the O.J. Simpson trial, and even went to the O.J. Simpson trial, which was pretty interesting. And so I was interested in television, and it was something that my co-writer John Wagner was interested in, and so we embarked on it. But it changed a lot from where we started and where we ended up. It changed, and it became, I would say, maybe more philosophical as it went along.
That's really interesting. Yeah. When's it going to be available?
It'll be available at the beginning of May, and you'd be able to get it through Continuum Books or through Amazon or through the IMS website.
Awesome.
Yeah.
You heard it here first. The beginning of May. Look for Tracy Maclean and John Wagner's Television at the Movies, Cinematic and Critical Responses to American Broadcasting. And I'd like to thank Tracy for stopping by and chatting with me on this week's edition of Seen on Screen. Up next, we have Steve Mears and I will discuss our favorite actors and actresses under the age of 30, and that should be really fun, so stick around. Thanks for stopping by.